Over the weekend, West Africa's monetary union has agreed with France to rename its CFA francs the ECO and cut some of the financial links with Paris that have underpinned the region's common currency since its creation. Now, under the deal, the ECO will remain pegged to the euro, but the African countries in the bloc won't have to keep 50% of their reserves in the French treasury, and there will no longer be a French representative on the currency union's board.
The changes were announced on Saturday during a visit by French President Emmanuel Macron to the Ivory Coast. Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara called it a historic day for his country and the whole of West Africa.
I'm happy to announce that, in agreement with the other heads of state of the West African Economic and Monetary Union, we have decided to reform the CFA franc with the three following major changes. Firstly, the renaming of the currency from the CFA franc to the ECO. Secondly, the end of the centralization of 50% of our reserves with the French treasury and the closing of the operating account. Thirdly, the withdrawal of France's representatives from all deciding and managing organs of the WAEMO.
Under the deal, the currency will be renamed the ECO. While it will remain pegged to the euro, the currency bloc will not have to keep 50% of the reserves in the French treasury, and there will no longer be a French representative on the union's board. The CFA franc was born in 1945 and at the time stood for French colonies in Africa. This was later changed to African Financial Community in West Africa.
I'm very happy today to be at his side to announce this major historic reform. This reform aims to cross another step together. You mentioned the pillars of it a moment ago, dearest Alassane.
The changes announced on Saturday will only apply to West African form of the currency used in Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal and Togo, all former French colonies except Guinea-Bissau.
Still staying with Emmanuel Macron's visit to West Africa, the French president has questioned whether West African leaders want French troops to stay in the region to confront armed groups. Mr. Emmanuel Macron was speaking in Niamey, the capital of Niger, and he said he was reluctant to send soldiers to countries where their presence isn't clearly wanted. Niger's President Mahamudu Issoufou discussed recent attacks by fighters linked to ISIL and Al-Qaeda in the Sahel region. Let's discuss more on this topic. We're now being joined by security expert Chidi Wonu. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, my first question to you is, with the volatile security situation in the Sahel region, do you think the French troops should withdraw?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Well, the withdrawal of the French troops, if that was an option, would be problematic. It would be problematic for France because it would kind of represent a loss of prestige or a defeat for French arms, even though they weren't military defeated. But at the same time, it would create a massive problem within the Sahel itself, as the French troops are the most capable troops that are currently in the region. They are combating, the insurgent groups that are there, maybe not, to a great measure of success, but much more successfully than if the countries were fighting off these groups by themselves. I mean, and their contributions are not just in terms of combat troops, but also what they contribute in terms of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, transport, logistics, training, and other things like that, and planning and organizing. So the French presence is key. And until powers such as Nigeria, who used to maybe be the strongest power in West Africa, who would have held this kind of hegemonic role, until Nigeria resolves its own internal security issues, then that somebody has to fill that gap. And right now it's France.
Yeah, at a news conference after a NATO summit in London, Mr. Macron says he wants the G5 Sahel leaders, that's Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad and Mauritania, to, clarify and formalize their demands regarding France if they want French presence or they need it. How do you think the G5 leaders should respond to this?
Well, part of the problem is that West African leaders in of themselves have shown very little aptitude or leadership in this problem. You'll recall that, in Nigeria's case, in the former administration, in order to tackle Boko Haram, despite Nigeria reaching out to the other powers, Chad, Cameroon, Niger, it took, the former president going to France and getting France to organize a conference in order to bring all these powers together. And then we got forward with the MNJTF. It's a similar situation here. What we've not seen is these powers organizing a conference by themselves and saying, okay, this is how we want to deal with the problem, and then talking to France or other powers and saying, this is how you can help us. There seems to be a lot of stepping back and letting someone else take up the mantle and then tagging on. That's a big problem. The second issue is that there's a lot of domestic resistance to France in each of these countries. This is historical, leading from their colonial role, but also from the neo-colonial role, in terms of the CFA franc, which is now coming to an end, or at least is being modified. All of these things mean there's a lot of domestic opposition to France. So the leaders have to play kind of a double role. They have to play the role of listening to that kind of domestic opposition, but at the same time they have to bear in mind the things I said earlier, that without France, they're going to be in a much more difficult situation. So it's a slight delicate balancing game that they need to play. And the key thing is that they need to step up amongst themselves and stop waiting for France to organize it, and then organize within themselves to what actually they see the foreign contribution being and how they would like it to be applied.
Yeah, your latest response is actually similar to my final question. Can West Africa's security forces overcome this security challenge without any international military aid?
Well, yes, they could, but it would take a long time. I think it would take decades if that's a realistic proposition. If you look at Britain in Northern Ireland, which is fighting an insurgency within part of the United Kingdom, an English-speaking part of the United Kingdom, it took 38 years to get to the point where they could get a negotiated peace against one group. Here you've got disparate groups in a wide area, different languages, different ethnicities. It will take a lot of effort, but the first thing that needs to happen is to use the structures that exist in order to start, reforming themselves, and that means joint planning, joint operations, joint doctrines. Trying to pool equipment, standardize equipment across, the board, and things. A lot of national limitations need to be put aside in order to combat this problem, which spreads across the Sahel and across different, ethnic and linguistic groups.
All right, then. Thank you very much, security expert Chidi Won, and thank you for speaking to us.